Hotep, greetings. I want to welcome everybody again, and again, I want to appreciate all the emails, comments, and positive feedback that we get from the YouTube show here. We appreciate the support, first and foremost. We appreciate people listening and tuning in, and obviously, the hope is that you take this information and utilize it, put it into perspective, dissect it, and learn something from it. Any of the information that we put on here. And again, I want to stress, and I make this clear to everybody that I communicate with, I don't want you to anybody to accept anything that I say or teach on these videos. I want you to, research it for yourself, and again, come to that realization of the truth within yourself, because that's when it becomes divine reality. Not because somebody told you, not because you read it in a book, not because some charismatic leader did a lecture that catered to your ego, but that divine awareness when you're studying and you're researching or in meditation or whatever other form of spirituality you practice. It's kind of just, it's an energy that hits you. Whether it's when the hairs stand up on your back because you come to the realization of something, or whether you're just engulfed in that divine love or that bliss that just speaks to the inner soul and says that this is the truth. So, having said that, I just want to throw that out there. And again, we appreciate the support. Now, what I want to talk about this week is because the subject matter that has pretty much come up throughout the week because of the show we did. Questions and emails we got on this topic, which I thought were very in-depth and important. We were talking about on this show the topic of gender. What is gender? What dictates what gender is? How does gender manifest? And why do we come here per se on this planet as male or female? And one of the number one topics, excuse me one second. Okay, and one of the number one questions is, what were the first, or who were the first beings on the planet, and what was their gender? Now we're going to go over and review this topic, because this has been a gist of a lot of the emails this week and some of the recent discussions, classes, and what we did and what we discussed on the Awaken Universal Minds radio show. So I figured we'd do a section on this tonight, since a lot of these questions came up and people had wanted to get some feedback on this topic, and we'll use some biblical quotes because unfortunately people get their definition of who and what the first beings were on the planet and what gender they were based on biblical and religious concepts, which are completely incorrect, and we're going to prove that tonight. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves, and this is something we all should be asking ourselves on a regular basis through our meditations and through our studies. Who are we? What are we? How did we get here? And, where we are going. The other thing we should ask ourselves, whether we're male or female, in that sense of who and what are we. Why did we manifest here on this realm as male or female? Now, some may have pondered that question in their mind. Some may have not. But this is something we need to probe into. Now, the fact of the matter is, when we first start, if we go into the biblical texts, which are incorrect and they contradict each other, and I'm going to go through Genesis real quick, a couple quick quotes, because it's the core and the foundation of what we're going to talk about over the next several minutes. And this is the, because you got to authenticate this to some people. They don't accept. This is the King James version. So sometimes you got to show doubtful people this. I should say doubtful religious people this, because sometimes when teaching and trying to get people out of that religious mind state, I've had people say, "Oh, you're using your own Bible." Stupid shit, because most of them don't even read their own Bible and they don't really understand their own Bible. Well, let's look at gender first of all in the book of Genesis. And we have a problem because in the first chapter it talks about the creation of both genders, male and female. And then in the second chapter it gets into two individual creations of the male and female. What is this? What is it talking about? And then we're going to take it back and establish just what was the first gender of the first beings that manifested on this planet. Okay? If we go to Genesis chapter 1 first. Okay? And we're going to start with the 26th verse. Let's start with verse 26 and we're going to read to 28 real quick. And it says, "And God said, let us make man in our image." Now God's talking here. "After our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Here's the important part. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply." And here's another key word I want you to focus on. "And replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." Two key quotes here. We see in the 27th verse, right here in this book, before Adam and Eve were even created, in the next chapter, which we're going to get into 2:7, and then 2:21 is the creation of Eve. Before we even get into that, what male and female was being created here in this 27th verse of the first chapter? We see both genders were already created before the individual creation of Adam and Eve. Okay? Then this goes on to say in the 28th verse, the term, and this creator told them to replenish the earth. The word replenish it means, the Hebrew word is more related to refill. It's the same thing when you say your glass of water is in there. I need to replenish my glass of water, refill it. So here's confirmation again that this is not the beginning of creation. This is another creational period taking place from many cataclysmic events, or rebuilding, or re-emerging periods, or after many meteorite showers that have destroyed the planet, and other cataclysmic events. The Genesis story is just picking up from one of these many events that have happened a multitude of times over history. This is not the beginning of creation. I know most people would like to believe that. They would like to accept that fairy tale illusion of the creation story in this book of Genesis, where it starts off with no information. In the very first chapter, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's all you know. God just was there. Some people will say the most ridiculous shit I ever heard, because they don't have an explanation of it. So without having a core foundation or factual information validating this story, it's easy just to believe in fairy tale and belief. And again, as I've said before, fear is the number one tool that keeps people enslaved and trapped. And religion is based off of this emotion of fear, because it keeps you fearing. If you don't accept and believe what you're told and taught based on the ideologies and the foundations of these religions, then you're going to be going to this place called hell, where you're going to burn in eternity, driven again based on the emotion of fear. So this is not the beginning. Let's establish that. As melanated people, the Bible story really taps into the origin of who we call the European, or the 100% Caucasian person. This is their beginning. This is their Adam and Eve that it's talking about here. This is not referring to the origins of the melanated person, because we know that based on doing the research of these books and these stories, we come to the understanding and the understanding that these were stories that were grafted from our ancient cultures that predated what we call the biblical Hebrews. who we don't even want to get into the whole fuss and debate about that at this moment, because, as you know, there is no such thing as these group of Hebrews mentioned in this whole Torah, because their story is identical to the plight of the Hyksos, the Hyksos invaders, or the Indo-European invaders who came into ancient Egypt and mixed in with the original pre-dynastic Egyptians, giving you what we would term as our last 46 Hyksos dynasties that most people are only familiar with. Most people don't even study the knowledge of the pre-dynastic Egyptians, who trace their origins back to Nubia, and Nubia predates Egypt, because you will find most things in Egyptian culture migrated their way out of Nubia. You will find some deities that identify with Egypt today only have their origin in Nubia, such as the deity Bes, who is depicted as a pygmy or a dwarf deity, the protector of child or children, who protected the child in the womb of the mother, who was their kind of pathway and road opener. This deity has its origin in Nubia. So you will find out, when you trace back the pre-dynastic Egyptians to Nubia, on back to the Neolithics, which were the people that occupied the Nile area before there was even Egyptian civilization. Now, we identify with Egyptian civilization because it's the oldest we find on record that we can identify with. That's why we identify with it. But our existence has no title or truth on it. We as humans or mortals gravitate towards something we can identify with because it makes us feel comfortable. That's it. But you can't put a time frame or a title on existence or truth. It just is. Melanated people have existed since existence existed. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's really the explanation of it. So we identify with these ancient cultures because we're able to connect with something that's tangible. Most humans can't connect with something that's not tangible because they can't relate to it, unfortunately. All right, so we're going to get back to these ancient cultures in a minute, and we're kind of going to revisit the origin of creation and some of the first humans to emerge on this planet. Who and what were they, and what was their gender? That's what we're going to establish here. So we see, as I explained, the creation aspect, which is incorrect in the book of Genesis, and it contradicts itself. Now, if we go to the second chapter of Genesis, I want to focus on Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 real quick. And the Lord God formed man in the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Okay? Then it goes on to tell you how he planted this man, Adam, in the garden, east in Eden, etc. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can read that on your own as you continue. So now we see that the very essence of the Creator was breathed, or what is referred to here as the breath of life, that breath of life breathed into the nostrils of this man, Adam, who religious people say we descend from, was the very essence that reanimated or animated man to become a living soul. We see earlier that both of these genders were created in the image and after the likeness of this Creator. So I want everybody to keep that in the back burner for a minute. Now, when you get into the same chapter, you go down to the 21st verse, the ridiculous kindergarten story of how Eve was created from the rib of Adam, which is completely stupid because it's metaphorical. Some people literally believe that this is an actual story or event that took place, which is beyond, amazes me. And the Lord God caused deep sleep. We're in the 21st verse of the second chapter of Genesis. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. And he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made he a woman, and brought her unto the man. Now you can continue to read on. So here we have now the creation of the female. Male earlier, chapter 2, later on down the 21st verse, female. Prior to that one, we already had the creation of male and female. Now, I bring this up because what was the male and female? Who and what were they that were created in the first chapter of Genesis? And then we again see the separate creation of Adam and Eve. So we have two creations of male and female, is what I want to point out here. Okay? Now, the problem with this is, this would give the illusion that men were on the planet first. And the reason why I point those two verses out, because people focus on the second chapter of Genesis, where it talks about the creation of man, but we see the female was also created in the first chapter. So it creates the illusion that men were first. It continues to enforce the theory or the speculation and promote a chauvinistic doctrine of male dominance. So when you read all throughout the Bible, from that point on, you see everything is male dominated. Most of the prophets, I don't want to say all, because you had so-called Ruth and Esther, but Esther wasn't actually a prophet. It's the only book in the Bible that the word God isn't mentioned, and then there's a reason for that, because that's a Masonic book that has nothing to do with religion. And you'll get more of that hidden meaning if you know what the Order of the Eastern Stars is about, which is based. Esther is one of the primary figures or characters that the mysteries of that order is based upon. And again, you can go look that up. That's the only book in the Bible that the word God is not mentioned in, which is the book of Esther. Okay, then it goes on, as you know, throughout all the biblical stories, it enforces that belief of male dominance. Okay, so question again is, what was the gender of the first people that walked the planet? And again, I went through that whole point to show you that aspect of it. But now when we go back into these cultures that predate these fictitious, watered down, grafted creation stories that we have in monotheism, and pretty much what we just went through in the book of Genesis, the three monotheistic religions pretty much accept the same concept of creation. There might be some slight variances, but most of them are on the same page with that. And I'm saying most of them being the three major monotheistic religions: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. But when you go back into these cultures, back into the pre-dynastic Egyptians, you go into Dravidian cultures in India, and remember, when you do the research, the ancient Dravidians were actually direct descendants of the ancient Africans. Okay, that's why there's a connection in cultures when you look in India. And to an extent, when you trace the genealogy back, a connection in genetic features and genetic descendancy. That too was once originally part of ancient African or Egyptian culture. Now you'll find in a lot of their texts, whether it's the Bhagavad Gita of the Hindus, whether you go back to Akhenaten, for an example, of the ancient Egyptians, you will find out that some of the depictions of Akhenaten depict him kind of curvaceous with a female bottom. Has a very strong male depiction, facial features, masculinity, but there's a lot of feminine energy too. These are androgynous beings in these cultures. Again, I'm just focusing on two: the ancient Hindu culture, or some of the ancient Egyptian culture, where there's records of hermaphrodites, or beings with dual sex organs. So now we have to factor in a whole different type of gender. Now we know there's a such thing as this type of gender, which brings up another point now, because in the book of Genesis, as we just read, it says that male and female were created in the image and likeness of God. So now my next question: if hermaphrodites exist, and we know they do to this day, we can confirm that. Whose image and likeness are hermaphrodites created in? Are they not children of God too? I'm saying according to religious theology. And is God a hermaphrodite? So this is the shit a lot of religious people don't want to address or deal with, because they live in this fictitious illusion: male, female, good, bad. Everything is taught in systems of repetition that there's no in between. So they don't reason in or use any type of spiritual reasoning to get to the core and the essence of their teachings and their so-called beliefs. So the first beings that actually manifested on this planet, you will find recorded in records that predate the Bible, would be these hermaphrodites. This is a scientific fact. Again, don't believe me. Check it out for yourself. Do the research, do the study, and you'll find out in all of these cultures that predate the Bible, throughout Africa and India, always taught that these were androgynous beings of a dual sex nature and possessed a balancement of the masculine and feminine energy. So when you look at the depiction of some of these deities like Krishna, and again Akhenaten in Egypt, you see a representation of both of those energies. Some of these male deities kind of still have a feminine energy and a feminine appearance to them. That's because of the connection to being these bands, or hermaphrodites as called, because they possess both of those energies. So the question is, what really is gender? Now, when you go into which we talked about this past Thursday on the Awakening Universal Minds radio show, when you talk about, for an example, the doctrine of gender, which is one of the 7 hermetic principles of Tahuti, it says gender manifests on all planes. Okay, now we know what the planes are. We'll talk about the first several. You have the physical plane. Okay, you have the material plane. But when you get up to the 4th plane, the mental plane, okay, beyond that, back to the 7th plane, which they would label as divine union with the Creator. And I say the Creator loosely, not some fictitious God, but that would be when you merge back into a complete, whole, supreme being. There is no gender when you get into what we would call a vital life force state, an etheric state, or a being of light and energy. Gender doesn't exist. Okay, but when gender first manifests on the physical realm, that's when gender is established physically, to determine whether you're male or female. Now, the reason why we're a byproduct of one of the two now, because genetically our genes are not as superior or as strong due to the various genetic mixing. This is why we come out more dominant of one of the genders or the other. But these pure genetic bands who were pure in their genealogy, this is a fact. They were hermaphrodites. They were beings that had dual sex organs. So that puts a whole wrench in the game to somebody who in their mind thinks that it's about masculinity, or the female in her mind who thinks it's about the femininity. Okay? We are just a manifestation of the lesser of the pure. Okay, now, bottom line is this: we know physically, and this is why people have a hard time grasping why there's chaos in the world physically, is because this planet is governed by feminine forces. And the very fact that men keep trying to rule in a planet that's governed by feminine energy will continue to show the manifestation of why chaos in a negative light runs amok, and confusion and death and violence, because you have masculine forces trying to rule a planet that's governed by feminine energy. Now, we know that the female gender manifested first physically on this realm. That's a fact, which again, when you go back into the creation story of Genesis, kind of negates this whole theory that men were created first, because we know through the research, for example, of the bones they found of this woman that they termed Lucy, that we've all studied and researched over the years, who they found in West Africa, whose bones go back to over 1.5 billion years through carbon and fossil dating, just eliminates and predates that whole Genesis story. Just puts it amok, because most religious people are under the illusion that creation began a little bit over 6,000 years ago, and that the man was created first. Now, we just use their own Bible showing otherwise, that it contradicts itself. So we know that that's not true. So we have to get out of this illusion to get back to the core essence of who these beings were. We have to get out of this illusion that physically men were here first. That's a scientific fact, and it's a sign. It's not a reality. It's based on illusion and faith and belief that can't be confirmed. So the female gender manifests first on the physical plane or the physical realm, not the male, contrary to what people want to believe. So once we establish that and get that out of the way and out of the box, we can take it back even further and more in depth. So when you go back to these beings again that we call hermaphrodites, or beings of dual sex organs, that we can confirm through the writings and through the various different texts, on the many different carvings, of whether it's the pyramids or the walls inside of ancient Egypt, Whether you go into some of the illustrations recorded in the Dravidian or the Hindu culture, which has its origin millions of years prior to the biblical story, you will see these androgynous or these dual sex organ beings. So this is the divine reality when we start talking about gender. See, if you want to really understand creation and you want to understand how things came about, and you're going to stay stuck in the Bible, you're never going to fully understand it, because again, the Bible has just been, a lesser graptation of some of our ancient stories that predated it by millions of years. So you would only get to the core essence of this by taking it further back. Now, I mentioned earlier when I talked about, for an example, the pre-dynastic Egyptians migrating from the Nubian culture such as civilization. Now, let's talk about that for the next several minutes or a few minutes. Because remember, Nubia predates Egypt. You have to do this research. You will find more Egyptian culture in Nubia to this day. When I say Nubia, what they call Aswan or Sudan, you will find more pyramids in Upper Aswan or Nubia, Sudan, than you do in Egypt today. This is a fact. If you've been there, you know that. If you've taken the Nile tour up into Aswan or Sudan or Nubia, you can confirm this for yourself. You can even Google and research this. This is a fact. Now, they don't talk about it because subliminally today, when you hear the word Egypt, and again, as I said earlier, you get mostly the last 46 dynasties, which were the mixture of the Hyksos or the Indo-Aryan Europeans that came in and mixed with the ancient Egyptians. That is the last 46 dynasties. And most people, unfortunately still, when they hear Egypt, they synonymously try to stamp in your subconscious mind that Egypt is part of a place called the Middle East and take its focus and attention off of Africa. Because we know Egypt is just a country inside of Africa. It's Northeast Africa. So they don't say that. They make it sound like it's part of this place that doesn't exist called the Middle East. So when you talk about Nubia, if they would sit there and draw attention to the fact that there's more Egyptian culture, more pyramids in Aswan or Nubia, it would focus your attention solely on Africa. Because it's not a mystery. Everybody knows that Egyptian culture migrated out of Nubia, and those ancient Nubians trace their links and origins back to the Pygmies and the Watusis. Okay, now we can go further back, and the Pygmies and the Watusis were tribes that existed prior to before there was any Egyptian civilization. So people can get caught up in the whole fact of debating Egypt and getting into the dynasties. And who was first, and all that other nonsense. But when you get back to the core essence of it, as I said earlier, people identify with Egypt because it's the oldest civilization recorded on record. And humans need to identify with something, unfortunately, sometimes because it creates a comfort zone for them. But the Pygmies and the Watusis were tribes that existed along the Nile River, or they're referred to as the Neolithics. They predated what we know as Egyptian culture or civilization. And that's why I said earlier, you can't put a title on the truth. Now, I know you got a lot of people want to run around and identify with Egypt and call themselves Nile Valley and all this other nonsense that they call themselves because it strokes their ego and makes them feel good. That's okay. But we got to get out of this mindset of saying that this was first. Because the first mistake in saying it was first is you're putting a time frame on something, and that's where the problem comes in, because there is no first, there is no last, because when dealing with the origin of melanated people's existence, there's no time frame on it. That's where the mistake comes in. And when I say we tend to over intellectualize and we start arguing over stuff that's irrelevant, as far as who and what was first, what tribe was first, what level of information preceded this, again, at the end of the day, it can only take you so far. So the point that we were trying to drive home, and that we'll finish up with, since these were the questions that we got throughout the week, that is what truly was the first gender that manifested on this planet, would be these hermaphrodites, these beings with dual sex organs that had dual nature and dual gender, representing the masculine and feminine principles. Now, again, you've heard us talk about on the radio show here on the Mother Nubia channel and show the deity Baphomet. So I want to revisit that real quick, because Baphomet represents the embodiment of totality, equilibrium. The symbols have the masculine and feminine forces. It has the finger pointing up and down, as above, so below, as within, so without. Okay, the doctrine of correspondence. It has a representations of all of the four major elements, the wings for the air. As I said before, in the center of the forehead, you have the raising flame shooting from the pineal gland, or representing the rising of the Kundalini energy. You have the scales on the abdomen, representing the water element, and then perched upon the earth as the earth element. You have the face of the man, what they call the goat of Mendes, which represents the masculine energies. And then you have the female breasts, representing the feminine energies, or the androgynous being, as we call it, perched on the earth, always in control and looking down on its subjects. So this represents this energy. This is what these symbols represent. We got to stop, again, as I say, take them and make them literal deities where we start worshiping them, as opposed to focusing on the energies that it represents. Now, when you meditate and focus on that Baphomet energy, you start to get these answers and these realizations, because that symbol in itself represents the balancement, the totality, and the equilibrium of creation. That's more important than getting into a nonsensical debate over who and what was first. You understand? That's the difference. Now, again, if that's your thing and you need to feel good to understand who and what was first, and you want to debate over nonsensical bullshit, then that's fine. That's your thing. But if you're a real mystic, a metaphysicist, and an alchemist, you want to get down to the essence of things. You want to be able to explain things based on reality, not fictitious faith, belief, or not define it by egotistical nonsense that suits your ego, personal ego. Now it taps into the fact, when we study ourselves, and we'll find out that a lot of us in our genetics and genes have manifestations, whether we're men, of female deities or female energies. Some may be aware of the realization of that, and some may not. So within your DNA structure, when you work with the ancestral spirits, if you're a man, you're not only contacting just male spirits or masculine energy, you also make contact with a lot of feminine energy. And then we haven't even tapped on the issue of reincarnation, that we've been here in past lives. And though you might be a incarnation of a male in this life, doesn't mean you were incarnation, or always were an incarnation of a male in a previous life. Vice versa for the female. Now, sometimes we're able to tap into our previous incarnations, and this is where some of the energy of those forces are represented within you today. Now, that gets into a whole nother story. I don't want to get into right now in-depth reincarnation, because that's a topic in itself, but reincarnation is important to factor in when talking about gender. When talking about gender in the now and who and what you are, because who and what you are now doesn't mean you were who and what you were in a previous incarnation, which is a telltale of a whole nother sign. And we know these cultures, being various African cultures, ancient Egypt, Dravidian cultures, clearly have strong doctrines on reincarnation. Now, religious person can say they don't believe in it, but their whole Jesus story is based on reincarnation, because they believe that a man physically died, ascended to the heavens, and technically, when you scientifically calculate, even when the time frame they claim the crucifixion took place, scientifically Jesus would still be traveling back to the heavens. But that's a whole nother story. We don't want to get into that. But they believe that same individual is going to return in the same body, whether it's a different physical structure, but they believe that the individual that died is going to return in a physical body. That's a form of reincarnation. Okay, and they believe in extraterrestrials, because this being left the physical realm, earthly realm, traveled outside of it, and now is going to re-enter it. So that would be an extraterrestrial being, or something extra, entering Terra, which is an ancient name for the planet Earth, and reincarnating in another physical body. That's reincarnation of an extraterrestrial being, whether they want to accept it or not. But these are the same fools that'll tell you that they don't believe in that. They don't believe in extraterrestrials and reincarnation and things of that nature. When, if you really look closely at their doctrine, embedded in that doctrine are those principles and sciences. So I'm gonna leave you there on that point, and get this in your head and meditate and focus on it when understanding who and what true gender really is. You have to factor all these principles in that we discussed in this class right here, because it'll get your mind thinking and evolving. It'll get your consciousness expanding to show you that there's a bigger picture. To show you not to get caught up in the illusion of who and what you think you are is different to who and what you actually are. That's two different things. Because people always try to be the person that they think they are. They try hard every day at being the person that they think they are, and they spend less time and energy on being the person who they actually are. That's the problem. Everybody wants to be everything other than themselves. But when you come to the reality of this, you will understand why you are male or female in this day and time. But you also will understand and understand genetically what you descended from, and kind of how when we say we fell from grace, for a lack of a better word, and we're not these supreme, pure genetic beings that we once were, it will identify the work that we need to do to get back to that point. The steps we need to do to get back to that point. That's what this is about. So hopefully, from the emails and questions and the discussions throughout the week, hopefully this sheds some darkness on the situation. I don't want to say light, because light is blinding. I hope this sheds pure, dark, chaotic energy on this subject matter, because remember, the dark, chaotic energy is undefinable. It has no limitations. It's divine potential for the consciousness to evolve. So I hope this sheds divine, dark, chaos energy on this subject, and it'll help your consciousness expand and raise yourself to the divine reality of the truth of what gender really is. So, having said that, don't forget to tune in on the radio show this Thursday night. We had to change up the schedule last minute last week due to one of the brothers, Ravana Noon family came in town, so we had to spend time with his mom. So show we had all planned together, which was the metaphysics of Sith alchemy, dealing with the Sith characters of the Star Wars trilogy. There's a lot of powerful metaphysical and alchemical information in that story that we're going to break down and how it correlates and relates to us today. We're going to do that show this Thursday night. We were supposed to do that last Thursday, but that's going to be rescheduled for this Thursday night. So don't miss that. That's 9 o'clock this Thursday. Also, upcoming lecture down here in Miami, just to put it out there. I'll be doing another lecture on November 14th. That's Saturday night, November 14th, 7:30 p.m. I'll get more information when it's all put together. So those that are able to come, or in this area, or able to get to the area, you're more than welcome to come. There's no charge or admission for the event. We just tell people to support for those events. And again, if you need to contact me for spiritual readings, spiritual consultations, anything of that nature, you can email me at khnum19@gmail.com. khnum19@gmail.com. And I'll have further information on any other upcoming events on the next post. So again, I want to thank everybody for listening and tuning in. And wherever the spirit or the ancestors leads us next week, that will be the topic. As I said, I don't really plan any of this stuff. I kind of just go with the flow. I kind of use what's dictated throughout the week, and if it sparks an interest, such as this week, this topic, then we just roll with that. So there's nothing really planned, so I couldn't tell you right now what next week's class or show will be about. You'll kind of find that out next week. But anyway, again, we appreciate everybody's support. As I said in the beginning of the show, I appreciate everybody tuning in. That listen from all over the world now. The radio show is growing. We got listeners international. The YouTube show here is growing. We got listeners international all over the world, places all over the Caribbean, St. Vincent, Trinidad, Jamaica, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico. We got listeners in Australia and Brazil, all Europe, France, England. Obviously, I can't mention all of them, and obviously all throughout the United States of America, all the, New York, D.C., Philadelphia, Chicago, California. We got people tuning in from Missouri, all throughout the state of Florida, from all the way from the tip of Jacksonville on down to Miami. So again, if I missed you, not intentionally, just want to thank everybody for the support and listening in. And we will see you on next week's show. Hotep, peace, and all that good stuff.